Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Robbie Rhino, and in today's video I am going to be reviewing the Leopard VT-2 in all its glory. The Leopard VT-2 is a premium Era 2 medium tank for the Western Alliance in the Cold War game mode, and being a Leopard, yes, it is a German medium tank, and I'm going to be comparing this tank to the Leopard 1A1, which you could get in the Steel Beast Season Pass. And they're very similar tanks in a lot of aspects, and a lot of players will want to know the differences. So I have created a little spreadsheet where we can go over the differences between this tank and the Leopard 1A1. I'll also be telling you my commander and equipment setup, and I will be showing you 3 gameplays to see how this tank compares and how it performs compared to the Leopard 1A1. These are the pictures of the Leopard VT-2. You can see that it has that familiar Leopard 1 shape. However, it does have some extra armor on the turret and on the side skirts, and what looks to be a little spoiler on the back there, which is some spaced armor, and we'll talk about the armor profile just a little bit later on. But first we'll talk about the price of the Leopard VT-2, and it is really good news. So from May the 10th, which was this Tuesday, all of the bundles were 50% off, and you can get any bundle you wish from the date that it is released, which is really nice for the player base. So if you wanted that Prime bundle with the equipment and the boosters and the premium time, it's only 11,050 gold, which is really good, a really good price for a Cold War premium tank, and one that is going to make you a ton of silver with 65% silver bonus. And if you just want to wait, or just want to get the base bundle, I should say, you don't have to wait. It is available now at 6,450 gold, which is a fantastic price, and I highly recommend getting this tank if you do like your medium tanks, and if you enjoy the Leopard 1A1, and I'll tell you why you might want to get this one and play it alongside or prefer this one over the Leopard 1A1. But we'll get stuck into the statistics right now, and then we'll talk about my commander and equipment setup, have a look at the armor profile, and then get stuck into the gameplay. So we're going to head on now over to this spreadsheet which I have created to compare both of these tanks, and as you can see I have various colors. The green is the better statistic, the red is the worst, and the yellow is just some talking points I want to talk you through. So as they are premium tanks, both of these tanks have bonuses, and they are the exact same. So you get an extra 10% XP per battle, an extra 10% commander XP per battle, and the big one is that 65% extra silver per game, which means that you absolutely rake in silver compared to a sort of World War II tier 8 premium tank. And even if you have mediocre to sort of poor games, you will still make a profit if you don't just fire full premium in these tanks. So now we're going to get stuck into the statistics of the Leopard VT-2 then, and having a look at the view range and the hit points here, you can see that this is intended to be a top level Era 2 medium tank. It has 2,930 hit points and 560 meters view range, which does beat the Leopard's 1A1's 2,500 hit points and 515 meters view range. In terms of its mobility, they are relatively similar, but the Leopard 1A1 does slightly pip the Leopard VT-2 in quite a few of these statistics. So the Leopard VT-2 has an 830 horsepower engine, which is the same as the 1A1's, but it does have a slightly worse power to weight ratio at 17.76, meaning it's harder to get into position as quickly as you may wish to, and harder to get out of trouble. In terms of the forward and the reverse speed, it's the same at 65.2 kilometers an hour for the forward speed. However, the Leopard VT-2 does have a slightly reduced reverse speed compared to the 1A1. It has 25.7 kilometers an hour reverse speed. The traverses on both of these tanks for the hull and the turret is fantastic. It's 42 degrees a second on the hull for the VT-2 compared to the 1A1's 48 degrees a second, so the 1A1 comes out on top there. But the VT-2 does have 2 degrees a second more turret traverse than the Leopard 181 at 38 degrees a second. So all in all, still pretty good for the VT2, but the Leopard 181 is the more mobile tank, and you're going to need that because you have less hit points, and you're going to want to try and avoid getting hit because it does have less armor, which we'll talk about in just a second. But right now we're going to get stuck into talking about the guns, and that's always the fun bit about tanks, right? So the VT2 has a 120mm caliber gun compared to the 1A1's 105mm caliber gun. In terms of what shell types you have on the VT2, it's APF SDS for the standard and for the premium rounds, and you have a heat option to fire as the third shell type. And the Leopard 1A1 has APF SDS for the standard and premium like the VT2, but it has HESH shells as its third ammunition choice, and if you make them work, that's fantastic because you can get that 570 juicy alpha damage, but it only has 250mm of penetration. In terms of the speed though, the VT2 comes out on top with its shell velocity at 1650 meters a second on its standard and its premium APF SDS rounds, and 1140 meters a second on its heat rounds, and that's really good for heat. That means that if you're firing at mid to long ranges, you won't lose any penetration over distance, and it won't be as hard as some heat shells are to hit over mid to long ranges. In terms of the speed for the 1A1, it's slightly less on the APF SDS rounds at 1455 on the standard round and 1478 on the premium round, and the HESH is very slow at 737 meters a second, so the VT2 comes out on top there. In terms of alpha damage, this gun does come out on top. It is a 120mm gun compared to the 1A1's 105, so it is going to have a slightly higher alpha damage. It has 50 more hit points worth of damage at 510 alpha damage on its standard, premium and its heat ammunition, compared to the 460 on the standard and the premium on the 1A1 and 570 on its HESH rounds. In terms of penetration, however, the Leopard 1A1 does actually pip the VT2. It has better standard penetration and better premium penetration, whereas the VT2 has 418mm of penetration on the standard rounds and 504mm of penetration on the premium APF SDS rounds. And the third shell, which is heat, has 490, which is still very good, and it is better than that HESH round that the 1A1 has at 250mm of penetration, but you don't have that option to fire at lightly armored targets and do 570 alpha damage. So in terms of the gun handling then, and as you can see there's a lot of green here for the 1A1, and unfortunately it does have better gun handling than the VT2. However, the VT2 isn't the worst that you'll see, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So on the VT2, the aim time is 2.3 seconds, you have a base accuracy of 0.34, and your base DPM is 3121.2. This is poor in comparison to the Leopard 1A1's gun handling. It has better aim time, better accuracy, and a higher DPM. But this does have that massive sort of chunk of 510 alpha damage, even though it's got worse DPM. If you are firing sort of here and there and you're moving from position to position and you're not consistently firing, this gun can chunk your opponents down and the DPM won't matter as much. But if you're trying to fight your way out of a situation, the Leopard 1A1, it has the DPM but it doesn't have the armor and it doesn't have the hit points, so it's kind of a catch-22, and they are very similar for that reason. These statistics on the side here is when my commander and equipment setup has been added, and we'll talk about that in just a second, but we'll finish talking about the VT2 statistics. You have a base reload of 9.8 seconds. You have 42 rounds, which is worse than the 1A1, which can carry 60 rounds of ammunition, but the gun depression and elevation is the same on both tanks at 9 degrees of gun depression and 20 degrees of gun elevation. So yeah, all in all, you can see that it's kind of mixed for both tanks. However, the VT2 does have those higher hit point numbers, higher view range. It does have that higher alpha damage, better shell velocity, and it does have the option to fire heat, which is more useful at mid to long ranges. The gun handling isn't as good as the 1A1's, as is the mobility, but you can make that work if you have a good commander and you choose the right equipment. So what equipment do I run on the Leopard VT-2 then. So in terms of equipment, I run advanced optics, I run that's incorrect. I run advanced loader, I run advanced gun laying drive, and I run gun stabilizer. The main reasons for this being is that I just wanted to prove everything about the gun, because that DPM is lower. I wanted to make sure that when I fired, I'm more than likely going to hit, and I'm going to penetrate, and I'm going to be chunking my opponents down. And I have toyed with taking off the advanced gun laying drive and running equipment to improve my mobility, but I found that I just changed that with my commander, so we'll talk about my commander setup just now. So in terms of my commander skills, I run Sixth Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, Rapid Aim, Snapshot, Run and Gun, Off-Road Driving, and Armour Angling. So I've improved included the off-road driving to improve my mobility over sort of different terrains. Armour Angling, because I have those better hit points, I want to try and reduce the damage that I'm taking. I'm going to be brawling ever so slightly more with the VT2 as it's transitioning into more of a main battle tank. And then I have the standard gun handling skills, the rapid loading to improve my DPM, and Sixth Sense and Born Leader as standard. So with those skills added, as you can see here, I now have an aim time of 1.94 seconds, an accuracy of 0.23, and a DPM of 4019, and that is much better than the base statistics. However, as you can see with my commander and equipment setup on the Leopard 1A1, which I'll link above for you now in the video where I reviewed that tank, it is slightly better than the VT2. However, the addition of having the extra hit points, of having the better view range, having the better turret traverse, the better shell velocity, the option to fire heat, that higher alpha damage, it doesn't mean that this affects the statistics of this gun too much. And having a higher caliber gun, you're more likely to do module damage, ammo rack tanks, set them on fire, and that kinds of things. So we're going to head on over now into the garage. I'll talk you through the armor layout of the Leopard VT2 just a little bit, as it's slightly different than the 1A1, and then we'll get stuck into the gameplay. So we're now into the garage here and looking at the armor viewer of the Leopard VT2, and this does actually have some armor that can help you in some situations and help you preserve those 2,930 hit points. So we're going to look at the thickest point, which is around the mantlet at 330 millimeters of armor, and there are various parts around the gun. The mantlet there at 280 millimeters, there's some plates here at 250 millimeters. The deck here is a good weak point. If you're shooting down, you should be able to shoot down on that. That's only 210 millimeters of armor. The side cheeks here, another plate at 190 millimeters, and this is sort of composite armor plates as well, so they're going to be able to absorb some ATGM damage, some HE damage, and hopefully absorb heat shells. So to get through this sort of composite armor on the turret, you're going to want to be firing high penetration APF SDS rounds, or just getting the side of the turret or the rear sort of the turret itself. It's a good thing to note that this upper plate is very weak. It's only 100 millimeters thick. It does have a 70 millimeter plate on top of spaced armor here. However, you should be able to go through it if it's looking at you. If it's slightly, if you're down on your lower profile tank and you're looking up, you might get some ricochets when it's angling like this. But if it's face hugging you, you should be able to shoot down on the upper plate. And if you're bouncing, this turret ring is a big sort of turret ring and a great weak point to shoot, as the cupolas are very hard to hit here, and shooting to the front of the mantlet and the front of the turret is kind of yeah, you're playing with fire there. You're very likely to bounce, and I've had people face hug me, and in one of the gameplays you're going to see me sort of face hugging a Soviet tank, and this tank comes out on top somehow, and that shouldn't really be happening for a medium tank. But as this is transitioning into like the main battle tank territory, it is going to have some more of that armor. As you can see here, there are extra sort of spaced layers here on the mantlet at 66 millimeters. Some more at 60 millimeters to the side of the turret. The gun itself and the lower plate there is 50 millimeters of armor, so the lower plate is very thick itself. You have some extra armour on the side here, which is 35mm, as well as the base layer of the side armour, which is 30mm thick, so it's not going to be a very good side scraper. You are going to get penetrated and overmatched by a lot of guns in Cold War era 2. Just to note that the rear of the tank there is 25mm thick, so you can penetrate this with HESH or with high penetration HE and with ATGMs as well. The tracks there have 20mm of armour, and there are these little spoiler things which I mentioned at the start of the video that hang over the back of the tank. If you're shooting there where there's no actual armour behind it, so right at the back there of the tips, you're not going to do any damage. It's not a hit box, you aren't going to do any damage and it's going to frustrate you. So if it's side on, shoot the side of the turret or shoot the top part of the side armour. Having said that, the other talking point is this little sort of band of 10mm armour alongside here. You add that to the spaced armour and the tracked armour, and you're going to be reducing the amount of ATGM and HE damage that you take if they shoot at this banding. One of the videos you're going to see someone come in from the side and shoot me and deal hardly any damage, if any, with their ATGMs, and that, yeah, shouldn't really be happening when you're firing ATGMs against a Leopard, but it's definitely very useful and it can keep you in the game. So try and bait people if they're firing ATGMs into firing at your mantlet, or just twist and turn and try and get them to fire into your tracks and the side, because that will reduce the damage that you are taking. All in all though, you can see there's lots of welded parts on the front. The mantlet's quite big, there's a lot of spaced armour and composite armour, so you're going to want to be firing very high penetration rounds to get through the front of the turret. The turret ring is the best weak point. The cupolas are hard to hit, so try not to just go for them. If you're above it, shoot down on the turret or down on the upper plate. If you're below it, shoot up into the lower plate. If it's face hugging you, then you can be shooting that turret ring and it's a good chance. If you're shooting the side with those ATGMs, go for that darker purple patch just underneath the turret. You should be able to penetrate and avoid getting trapped or baited and falling into the trap of firing at those little winged tips on the back of the Leopard VT-2, because you won't be dealing any damage. So there's a little bit of armour there to help you out. It can be a little bit trolly for a medium tank, and it can mean that you are in the battle for a lot longer. So that's enough talking about the armour. Let's get stuck into talking about the gameplay. So we're here on El Alamein in the first gameplay of today's video, and we're going to see how the VT-2 performs in comparison to the Leopard 1A1, and you're going to be seeing here at the start of the battle how good the mobility is from sort of a standing start, and you can see it's not too bad. You're keeping up with pretty much everything on the battlefield. You're going to be slower than the light tanks and the Leopard 1A1, but you're still going to get into position nonetheless, and you can improve that and use the mobility equipment if you wish. However, because of the extra hit points, because of the armour, I'm going to be playing this slightly more aggressively than I would the Leopard 1A1. I'm going to take a little bit more time to get into battle, but I'm going to try and make sure that when I do get into battle that my gun handling and the alpha damage help me, and the armour help me to sort of chunk down the opponents. And I found that this tank and the 1A1 are fantastic tanks at sort of combating the FE4-211, which is an absolute nuisance in Era 2. If any of you have tried to sort of take one of those out and failed, even though you feel like you should be penetrating shots right into the side of that tank, this penetration, although worse than the 1A1, is still pretty good penetration, and it should be able to deal with those tanks no problem. So I carry plenty of the premium APF SDS rounds, and as you can see, I don't carry any heat rounds. I find it sometimes useless in Cold War because of all the sort of ERA armour, the spaced armour, the composite armour, and it just gets absorbed, and also it usually has worse shell velocity. But the heat would be a good option with this tank if you are struggling to penetrate at long distances, because of that shell velocity, which is over 1000 meters a second, meaning that it's a pretty good option to fire at long ranges. So the VT-2's gun handling here, you can see it mid-range to short close range, it isn't too bad at all. It can feel a little derpy at times, even with the commander and equipment setup that I've used, and that's why I run the advanced gun lay and drive on the commander, because I felt like it was taking a little bit too long to aim in, even with a good commander. So for the equipment, I've run the advanced gun lane drive, the advanced loader for the DPM, and the stabilizer for the accuracy. The 510 alpha damage, you want to make that try and work whenever you fire to penetrate and make sure your shell counts. With the 1A1, the DPM is that much better that if you miss the shell occasionally, it doesn't feel like it's too much of a pain. But because this tank does have that reload above 7 seconds for that 510 alpha damage, it can feel quite annoying when you miss a shell. Of course, you do have the armor angling skill on the commander, which means that sometimes you're going to be rolling for a lot less than that 510 alpha damage, and you also have the advanced armor that you can use as a piece of equipment. So if you find yourself rolling for a lot less than 510 alpha damage, that would be why, and that is why it's quite nice to have this 120mm gun that is capable of doing the 510 alpha damage, because when you don't roll low, you chunk them, and even when you roll low, you're still rolling more than you would with the Leopard 1A1's 105mm gun. So here on El Alamein, you've seen we've sort of come to this western side of the map. We sort of came up from the south through the middle, and now we're on the sort of western side using the ridge lines. 9 degrees of gun depression is sort of perfect for these kind of positions, and I don't feel too worried about exposing my turret for slightly longer than I would when I'm playing in the 1A1, because it has that extra armor on the mantlet, and you have those sort of skirts of armor on the side, meaning that if someone was to fire a sneaky shell or heat shell or ATGM shell into the side, you have a chance of absorbing a lot of the damage or absorbing all of it, and you also have a chance at bouncing APF SDS rounds, and the armor can keep you in the battle for a lot longer than you would expect a sort of relatively lightly armoured medium tank to do. So we've already picked up 4.8k direct damage, we've blocked 460 damage, we haven't lost any hit points yet. We do have plenty of hit points to play around with. As always, try and preserve them for as long as possible, but don't just sit there if you feel like you're losing the game. And this is the point of the game where I felt like I had to relocate, come and protect the cap circle from the south and the enemies that are coming up to the middle and coming down the eastern side. And I'm sort of prepared to take a shell or two here. As you can see, I run the smoke consumable. I've sort of toyed between that and running the combat rations to improve the DPM and the gun handling, but that smoke does get you out of a few sticky situations, especially if someone's charging in with ATGM. You can just pop your smoke and their ATGM gets lost and goes into the abyss behind you, which is always really pleasing. So although I said that it doesn't side scrape well, I'm side scraping because I'm just going to try and minimize the amount of tank that the enemies can see, and it allows me to get cheeky shots in. And now I'm going to just go in and help this T-72 out, take out that Leopard 1A1, and we're now up to 5.8k damage. And like the Leopard 1A1, this tank does rack up the damage very quickly, even though it has less DPM. You find that you are racking the damage up every game, and I found that this tank is extremely consistent. The Leopard 1A1 can have sort of those epic games where you deal a lot more damage purely because of the higher DPM. I feel like you can just rack it up quickly if it's a quicker game, and this tank does struggle if the games are really fast because of that lack of DPM in comparison to the 1A1, but you still have a pretty consistent damage output, and this tank is going to be a lot better for the majority of players. I'd say it's a lot more consistently putting out the damage. You're able to bounce a few shells, it's quite forgiving. You have that extra a little bit of hit points. If you make a mistake, it can't be, or it's not always the end of the game. But maybe when you progress with this tank and you found that you're loving the playstyle and you're enjoying it, then you might be able to play the 1A1 in a slightly different way, a slightly more conservative way, and you might be able to get more out of the 1A1 in terms of damage and those really exceptional games. But for the majority of players and for making silver, this is a fantastic tank. And it's a good price for it, and you can also ram the 1A1 for a lot more than it can do to you because of the extra weight that you have with all of that extra armor on the front of the tank. So that's the end of the first game there on El Alamein. We finish with 4 kills, finishing in the MVP slot with 7.6k direct damage. We do block that 460, get 93 assistance, and we make a profit of just shy of 500,000 silver. So we're going to hop on now into the second gameplay, and I'll talk you through what I'm thinking in that game. So we're now on Heilbronn in the VT2, and at the start of this battle I'm going to go to a very familiar position right in the centre of the map and use the ridgelines to try and spot the north, people that are trying to get into the town, and also get shots at the hill sort of along the B line in B7, B8 where people like to hide, and I'm going to try and get some sneaky shots off at the start of the game. Because of that higher alpha damage, it's really nice to get those shots off at the start. You really do feel like you're chunking some of the opponents down, and it's quite a unique alpha damage which makes this tank kind of fun. You can see here that there's this T-72 that has been spotted out in the open, and we're able to use the 9 degrees of gun depression here absolutely fine and get a shot at the start of the game where we roll high, and now we can go to work on the other tanks that are going across here. And you can see here that we're actually rolling high, which is nice, and within 2 shells we're already over 1000 damage, and that can happen, and you definitely can accrue the damage very quickly in this tank, and it's just an absolute blast to play. And that shell velocity being really fast at over 1600 meters a second means that even at long ranges to lead targets, it just feels like you don't have to give as much lead as with pretty much every other tank that you play in Era 2 of Cold War. It just feels absolutely phenomenal, and it feels like a sort of Leopard should be sort of sniping in mid to long ranges, doing good amounts of damage, using gun depression on ridge lines, and using the ability to get around the battlefield. This one does have that slight problem compared to the 101 in terms of the mobility, so from a standing start it's slightly slower, and if you get yourself into trouble you do have to run that sort of smoke consumable to try and block your path and make your escape, because the 1A1 is slightly better at getting out of harm's way, as our mobile on our team just jumps into the little river there. But as you can see here, we're able to use this ridgeline, get a shot in, and just pull back. And the only thing holding this tank back sometimes is that DPM, although it is still pretty good. When you're above an FE4211, you should be able to go through the front hull of the FE4211 no problem, and then you can always switch to these premium shells if you do. And I now run full premium. I ran quite a few games with this setup of 21 shells of standard APF SDS and 21 shells of premium APF SDS, and it still worked for me, but I just ran the full premium because some of the shells were bouncing at longer ranges because of the penetration drop off on the sides of the sort of Eastern Alliance heavy tanks and that kind of thing on the FE4211. It just meant that I was missing out on 1-2 sort of shots of damage per game, and it's improved my sort of games by sort of 1 to 2 shots, 1 to 5 shots per game, and you just get that a little bit of extra damage, and you actually make the silver back by doing that anyway. So even if you ran full premium, you still make a pretty decent profit if you do run a premium account in WoTC console, that is. But all the ammunition choices are absolutely fine on this tank. There's not one that's really useless. On the 1A1 I rarely use the Hesh. That might just be because of it's my play style or my choice or my reluctancy to do so, but it can be useful, especially when you're fighting a light tank or you know you're going to be fighting a light tank and that kind of thing. So here on Heilbronn you can see that we've already racked up 3.2k damage, and we'll just go in from ridge to hardcover to ridge, and we're just trying to minimise the amount of shots that enemies have on us, and we're going to help our teammates out, play that supporting role, and then we can go in if we feel like we're losing the battle, or go in at the end, use our hit points, take a shot, try and bounce a shot and get stuck in. And like I said in the previous replay, if there's a tank lighter than you, some of the light tanks, the medium tanks, especially the 1A1s, and maybe a Scorpion 90, you can ram them for a substantial amount of damage, because this is a relatively hefty tank compared to most mediums because of all that extra composite armour on the front of the turret there. So now this is a pretty close game. We're just going to be advancing to the centre and see if we can get shells into the tanks that I said like to camp along that sort of top hill there. We're not going to advance right in front of them. We're going to try and get round the side of them, and one of the reasons why I wanted to include this particular replay in this review is coming up right now, and you'll see, and it's basically a brawling situation that I felt like the 1A1 wouldn't get out of. I would have got absolutely wrecked, and maybe in most sort of light tanks, maybe even quite a few of the other medium tanks I would have taken out. But the extra armour and the armour layout and the armour damage and the penetration on the VT2 saved me, and yeah, it feels like I managed to get through that battle because of that, and you'll see that coming up shortly. So I could have gone right round towards the north and avoided trying to get into the cap circle to alert them of my presence. That would have been the smarter move, but I've got some extra hit points and we are winning this battle quite sort of dramatically, so it's not an issue at all. Yeah, I just want to get some extra damage in, and sometimes I don't care if I know the game's almost won. I don't care if it means that I'm going to go in and I am going to win or get some extra damage for myself, get some extra silver, some extra XP, and even if we're going to win, I want to try and get the most out of it. And there's where that 80 GM usually would have penetrated. It would have penetrated the 1A1, I'm more than sure of it. That would have pretty much half-healthed me, and these two tanks would have been able to beat me. But you're able to brawl like this in this tank, you're able to take on multiple tanks, multiple other medium tanks that are considered sort of middle to bottom era 2 tanks, and you're able to sort of go up close, use your turret and try and bounce shots off your turret and off your armour, and it just works out really well. And we managed to get through that, and we only lost a few hit points. We left on 1877 hit points, and we got through that with a fairly decent game, picking up 7.1k direct damage, 858 assistance. And we get a kill as well, finishing in 3rd place with a profit of just shy of 500,000 silver again, and this is with a ×2 silver booster, I believe. So we're going to head on now into the 3rd and final replay of today's video. Right, we're on Heilbronn again. This time we are in the exact opposite spawn that we were in the last replay, and we're going to try and head towards the same kind of position, just use the opposite side of the ridge and spot out the middle and spot out towards the south. I think I was on my phone then when I was driving into a rock, which, yeah, don't drive and text, especially tanks. It can be extremely dangerous, but we managed to get out of that one. Luckily, there's no collision physics when you're going straight on, only when you hit a tree or something stupid, but that's for a different video. So there are tanks that have crested and got to position quicker than I have, and that's kind of a downside of the VT2, is that sometimes tanks can do that because you have that slightly reduced mobility compared to the 1A1. We popped some smoke there. We're just trying to protect ourselves while we try and help our teammates take out this RDF LT. Unfortunately, we bounce off a ridiculous angle, and that's because of the shell normalization with the APF SDS rounds. That's where heat would have penetrated. But, you know, that's a very sort of rare occurrence. It's just annoying when that kind of thing happens. And now we're going to try and get under the gun line of these tanks, and I'm going to help out this medium tank, try and protect this middle area. We have a lot of tanks that are camping in sort of B7, B8 on that sort of hill line there, and you find that regardless of whether you play World War II or Cold War, it can be extremely frustrating, because even though they're there, they seem incapable or unwilling to get shots into things that we are spotting here that are coming over and poking over and shooting us. And from this location, if you get into a position like this, you can be trying to sort of take on tanks from multiple directions if you don't have help from that hill. So it's always nice to have help from that hill. If you're on the hill, try and help out tanks that spot in this middle bit, because if not, they're going to get out under your gun line and they're going to yeah, they're going to flank you and probably win the game for the enemy team. So smoke's pop there gives us a little bit of a respite. We've already picked up 1.5k damage. Going into first person here into sniper mode while I'm going through the smoke, so I'm able to try and scope out a shot from the outline of a tank I see. Sometimes like that, when you quickly snap a shell, because of the slightly worse gun handling that the VT2 has compared to the 1A1 and other tanks in Era 2, you will miss the occasional shell like that. But if you let it aim just for that little bit longer, or fully aim, as you can see, we get a nice shell there into the VT2, the enemy VT2, and yeah, you start to chunk away tanks. And again, 9 degrees of gun depression is perfect for a position like this. There are plenty of ridgelines in the game that are good for this. If I was struggling, I'll just move a little bit more to the left where it's a little bit flatter, and I should be able to get my gun down a little bit quicker and expose less of my tank. So we're now up to just shy of 3k direct damage, and by being the one sort of being the aggressor with this tank next to me, we're able to get some assistance as well. We pick up 1373 assistance. I'm trying to get out of the habit of snapshotting tanks that are really quickly forcibly pushing me and make sure I aim, but sometimes auto aim can be the difference between you getting a shot in and you not reacting quick enough. I'm definitely not the quickest at reacting all the time, so sometimes that's a tactic that I use. And I'm just trying to sort of keep an eye on the peripherals, making sure I'm looking out for tanks that are crossing, things like this happening where they're crossing the distance, anything I can do to help the team and help tanks on the enemy team get taken out before they reach the hill that all our tanks are protecting our base with. The view range isn't necessarily an issue on this tank, although it is better than the 1A1 because of that sort of true vision. It's not always the issue, although it can be nice and you can surprise out some light tanks that are hiding in bushes at mid-ranges that think they're hidden when they're actually not, and you can see them. And that BP2 is in the distance. We're going to try and take him out, but he gets into cover. They can be very nasty if they get behind this tank or the 1A1 because of that armour at the rear is very thin. You can get set on fire very often. I've had my fuel tanks damaged very often in the Leopard 1A1, so that I recommend carrying a large repair kit and also a large med kit just in case anything like that happens. But of course that's a sort of thing that you can play around with. But you can see here that when you get going, when you start to sort of get your gun flow in, you are able to absolutely smash your enemies. And I didn't really realise that we were winning by so much at this point in the game, and now it's just a case of trying to get that last little bit of damage. I'm hoping that the enemy medium tank is going to push around the side there, but it looks like I'm going to have to go forward. And there's a full health, or nearly full health I should say, heavy tank here in the south eastern corner. We're going to go up here and see the mobility, and now we're going to see if we can maybe get a ram in for some nice juicy damage here. We managed to get a ram in, 578 damage, tracking in place, get some assistance, and the reload's good enough to get the final kill. And that's yeah, just shy of 8k direct damage, 2.1k assistance. We get a kill there, finishing in MVP slot. We make 558,000 silver. That's only a second class mastery, showing how powerful this tank is. And like I've been saying throughout this video, this is going to be the tank of choice probably for most players. It's going to be more forgiving, it's going to be more consistent. However, when you get used to playing this, playing the 1A1 will be a lot easier, and with that increased mobility, the better penetration and the better DPM, you might be able to have some epic games in the 1A1 as well. But it's a very good price and I highly recommend this tank. So that's it for today's review. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give a like and comment below. But until next time, I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.